and welcome back to Best Love Films, the podcast that goes at bestlovefilms.com. Good to say progress, not podcast. I don't know where
Yeah.
it's coming from. Let's begin by acknowledging this land was stewarded really nicely by a lot of Native Americans who are not my personal ancestors, and I want to thank them for that. And also to try to honor their work in some way. Okay, that's what I want to say. My name is Daniel Smith Rousey. Also with me today, as he is going to be, he's promised to do this for the entire season. Probably the biggest mistake he ever made. He's thinking to himself at night. It's Kieran Edwards. Kieran, hi.
Hello. I just want to let you know, obviously, I do enjoy this as a second job. It's actually been quite nice. So, as far as second jobs go, it's definitely the best second job I've ever had.
Kind of
So,
my first job because the other ones I didn't.
yes, I
Yeah,
know.
okay, but go ahead. Yeah, but no, and
Uh,
weren't you going to say something about this crop of films, or should I maybe
Basically, I was just
the
going to
first?
say I feel very encumbered by our 2 hour limit that we've set upon ourselves to
Yes,
talk
yes,
about films per episode. For this
yes,
particular episode in particular, I
yes,
feel
yes.
as if the time limit is much like a particular sort of iron mask with spikes on it that is being forced upon us that we have to wear while we discuss the movies in this episode.
But you never know what might happen when that mask comes off. I'll tell you what, I
Exactly.
can go a little over the 2 hour mark because I know that when we edit it later, it'll take out the uhs. We probably will actually, with the editing, come in. So if it's okay with you, sure, let's give everybody a little
We
extra.
shall see. Yeah, it depends on what we have to talk about, but
Yeah.
I
Oh, but
imagine we have
I
plenty to
love what
talk
I'm hearing.
about.
I love
Yeah.
what I'm hearing because I just want to set this up. I really think this is one of the most special episodes like that we've had, maybe the most so far, because there's several reasons. One is that all four of the movies are set in the same year, and I got to I'm sorry, we're made, not set, made in the same year. They're actually surprising how many of them are contemporary, but yes. And also that none of them are American and they're in four different countries. We could have had four non-American films, but two of them be British or something. This is really a kind of a special group for many reasons. And if you throw in Hitchcock's Psycho, as I'm sure will come up once or twice,
Right.
that's quite a fivesome. I mean, that somebody should do something with that. Put these five films somewhere, either in a festival or a day of total horror, like some Halloween, some October 31st programming or something. I don't know. I don't know. I'm blown away and each of them is so cool and progressive in their own way, and each pivoting to this whole new realm of horror in their own way. I'm just like there's something so great about each of these films that's really striking to me. Wait, let me just, I feel like I should quickly say what they are, Kieran.
Of
Is that
course,
okay?
yes.
Or if you want to, you could. I don't know. But it's Eyes Without a Face or Les Yeux en Visage. I always get that wrong if I try to say it. Peeping Tom. I'm gonna get this one wrong too. Jigoku, did I say that right?
I believe it is, but also I think why I'm also as unsure as you are. So
And
we
then
we can be
Black,
unsure together.
and then Black Sunday, sometimes called the Mask of Satan.
Mhm.
On the poster, it looks more like the Mask of the Demon, like from the direct, like Italian translation. Anyway, we'll find some title that we're both comfortable with, and we don't want to waste everybody's time on that. I have to just start by asking you, Kieran, with a question. What was in the water like in 1959 or whatever to be making these movies all around the world? Where do you think this
I
is?
was trying to figure that out as well too, because I don't believe there's as much of a, I was didn't do as much of a cursive search like history wise to know what was in the water. Like say in 69, like a mere decade later, a lot of other things were in the water as well. And those films that were taking
Sure.
place in 69 and 70, which were also say filmed in say 68 possibly, those were being filmed under a particular, let's just say, strenuous time in world history as well.
Sure.
And
Yes.
the 50s have always had this, at least in my mind and maybe other people's minds, a sort of a decade of tranquil conformity that also has some sort
We
of
can think of it that
underneath
way, don't
sort
we?
of,
Yeah.
yeah, we can say that. And but underneath there's this sort of tranquil conformity as well. And as because of that, there's also a sort of, let's just say, a paternal hand that is over us, that was over people during the 50s in particular. And I don't know if that existed just in America or if it existed in other countries as well. I think that was the case. And we'll see in different parts of the different movies that we're covering, how the sort of the paternal hand that is
Mm,
guiding and moving plots along also is leading various people in those movies to various bits of
mm.
ruin as well. So
I love you connecting the paternalism of the 50s to these movies. Yeah, we've definitely got some themes. We got dogs, we got, and before we had cats, now we have dogs. We got faces. Three of the four films are very centralized, like faces. Although the fourth one, Jigoku, is not about faces.
quite the
For
opposite, yeah.
example,
And also, ironically enough, that
right.
we are covering a Japanese film the first time and we're not talking about cats.
Thank you. Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, what's up with that? Makes no
yeah.
sense. Yet it's there, right? Yeah, there's so much. I was trying to determine what was in the water. When I discuss that as a professor in my classes, it's usually in an American context, and I know that there were all those teenagers were like known to be an audience, and that was one of the big reasons that horror got a little bit more respect. It was one of the reasons Roger Corman figured he could do certain things, like in the late 50s, honestly. And then I just think that because of some of that bottom up pressure, you had more of an audience for Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, those creepy stories. And I think that on some level, some of that's, I feel like it filtered out to other countries. I feel like guys like Michael Powell, who'd made like 13 terrific films with his partner Pressburger, there was a way in which a story like Peeping Tom was more possible for him in 1960 than it would have been in 1950. I think it was just, it seemed for several reasons.
We can talk about those. I have a few ideas about that as
Yeah,
well. There's,
right.
but when we talk about films in Europe as well, that's still like in the late 50s, not that far removed from World War II and the shadow that
That's a
cast
good point.
upon everything as
Yeah,
well.
that's a good point. But
So
horror's getting more credible. I think partly it was the group, the Curse of Frankenstein group. Wait, why? Oh, the Hammer group. There's being able to do better than them, or not better, but just okay, they're doing it. Why don't we? And there's those guys, the Boileau, Jacques guys who are still writing, who still they'd already made. We already know their Diabolique. We already know their Vertigo. And so it's not like they had just stopped working. So I think eyes with that. And then the thing is that novel only came out in 1959. It was basically an adaptation like 2 seconds later. They were like, okay, yeah, we'll get that right. And that doesn't always happen with a novel, but in this case, and then yeah, Jigoku is so fascinating for so many reasons. Maybe we should, I feel, but anyway, I just think this would be like such a terrific, I don't know, bill somehow, maybe with Psycho, maybe without. So
from what
should,
I know, actually, as well,
go
I
ahead,
think
sorry.
other people have mentioned, and I think I was when I was doing a little bit of cursory research about what was going on, mentioning when somebody was mentioning about at least one of these films I was covering, they were talking about how these other specific horror films came out of this year, and not coincidentally, it listed all the four films that we're covering today.
Amazing, yeah. I
So
mean,
it was just
obviously, there are all kinds of horror films we don't discuss, but these four being such landmarks and coming out at the same time, I just think like, I don't know. Yeah, I just think standards were like lowering everywhere. Or maybe like even in Italy, there might have been a thought like they had a thriving film industry, but they might have been more open to somebody like Mario Bava for the very reason that like American standards like the Hays Code was fading. Well, now we can get away with this. Or maybe they saw, I don't know, Ingmar Bergman's Seven Seal and said, okay, we could do that, but better, or but with a little more like fierceness or something. I don't know.
there's that, but there's always just the idea of horror movies. I'm trying to think about maybe late 60s, early 70s were when the idea of actually putting money into horror movies seemed like a viable thing to
Right.
do production wise.
I
So
see.
horror movies
Right.
have always seemed to have operated within the shadows, so to speak, and also
Ooh,
within lower budgets as well,
sure.
because of and also especially with the 50s sort of models that Roger Corman and other sort of studios, even in Japan, even the studio that we'll be talking about that produced Jigoku, even though this was on its last legs and this was like the last film that they produced actually, but they were using a
Interesting.
similar sort of model, I think,
Yeah.
that AIP was using as well, of just putting just lower budget genre, what would other people have termed as like para cinema, which is another sort of term we might want to talk about as well, maybe. It's
Mm,
just because there's a book I was reading as well that also
please.
mentions that as, and yeah,
What?
so I think because of that, like all of this was going on and they had this sort of budget, people could work undisturbed. And I don't know if, regardless of whether, I don't know, it is a sort of, I'm not quite sure how all the different sort of stars aligned with that particular year whenever these were produced. And I think we're probably still going to maybe figure that out as we discuss these films in more detail as we go along with this episode.
So true. In Jay Hoberman's book about the 60s, granted, he's mostly talking about America, but he was like, there was already a desire to have new things. That was part of what Kennedy and de Gaulle and other people just meant was like, the 50s have been repressive everywhere. Let's have something new. And then, they were in the ads. It was, okay. But anyway, actually, I was going to mention, as like I'm pretending that all the walls were coming down, and that's not really true. But I mean, I do think there was something. That's what's so great about studying film history or just watching it is that you see little by little. And yet I see some great leaps forward for these countries at these times. I think what I'm looking at though is apparently so I'm just going to jump into the use visage.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm noticing that first of all, you had Franju who had made Blood of Beasts. That movie's was already on the D list. It was already in the documentary group. So we're already into Franju here on the
Oh,
podcast.
we go, but I hadn't watched it until I watched it
Yeah.
preparing for
Oh,
this
good.
movie,
Okay.
and
Yeah, we
Jesus
discussed it.
H.
What?
Christ, yeah.
Well,
So,
it's funny you should say that because no, it's not exactly hilarious. You should say that, but like when the producers and everything were getting Le Youth Sans Visage together, they were like, "Hey, Franju, don't torture animals. Like we know what you normally do, so stop." Because that was going to upset British censors. They want to be sure the movie could play there, and it's in the book that the dogs are much more tortured. It's funny, we're actually not seeing as much dog torture as we're hearing about here and in the Black Satan movie, Sunday, you know what I meant. And then there was also like don't no nomad scientist characters that was going to upset German censors, and not too
mhm.
much blood, which would upset French censors. All of this is in the book because the book is 1959 and trying to be one of these books that I would call it maybe a little bit like William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, like 12 years later, like trying to annoy everybody or what's funny is that this is one of those cases when you're watching Le Youth Sans Visage where the limits are what kind of make it good. They're like those slow scenes where she's just drifting through the house. She's not literally drifting the way that character was in House of Haunted Hill, where she's like on a dolly, but
Right.
she seems, drifty, if that makes us, if you know what I'm getting at. And like those quiet scenes, you could imagine that maybe Franchu had hoped to throw in more blood, more animal torture, but it worked. It sets a mood of weird restraint, which is strangely right for the material, I think. I don't know. What did you think?
Agreed. And also, ironically enough, let's see, I spent a little bit of time looking. I think you and I have had basically a about a week or so of spent basically on the Criterion channel, ironically enough, this week.
Good times.
And so with the extras for Eyes Without a
Eyes Without a
Face,
Face is fine. Yeah.
they're trying to think about which one I particularly looked at where they actually originally, when talking about the movie, there was a little bit of like cuts here and there of definitely like scenes that were made for the movie but were cut out originally. Like there's a
Mm,
particular death involving something involving someone's throat. There's actually
mm,
a version where there's actual blood that comes out as well,
mm.
which is not in this particular final product. Um, there's definitely like a few scenes, so definitely a few stills of the doctor and the daughter basically with her mask off essentially. We only basically see that essentially in one glorious scene in this final film as well. And then even when we go to when it gets released as a wholly different, ironically named title, The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus over in the US.
What? Oh my word.
Um, when that
Gee.
happens, there's the things that get cut out of there, including the actual like surgery scene, is very sort of excised out of that one, which is ironic enough considering it's a film about a mad doctor as well.
Thank you.
So
Yeah. It's almost like when they decided to excise scenes from Freaks and they stunted it and they turned it into two-thirds of its normal size. Wait, the analogies, they're driving me crazy. Yeah, I don't know. It's sometimes disjointed. That guy Tissot who accosts him and says, "My daughter's been missing 10 days," or whatever. You don't need that. For example, there's a few things, and
I
you know,
would only argue you would need that and only to give you it works. It's the second time you watch the film, it basically provides a bit of a signpost of what's the big reveal with the doctor? Because there's certain things
Sure.
that you don't know about the
I guess
doctor
that's
until like
true.
there are two characters that you don't realize are related to each other or intimate or like connected
Right.
to each
Oh,
other.
because you don't, well, Jacques must be one of them, right? Because at first, well, or maybe that's not what you mean. I don't know.
I'm talking about his assistant, basically,
Well,
right?
that's Jacques. Yeah.
With
Wait, okay.
Jacques, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically
Yeah. So
they're
we,
not related until they don't you don't see the connection until the funeral, basically, right? So
sure. Yeah. 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 I don't know what to say. Boy, the Maurice Jarre music, I love it. It also, I worried that Larry David had ruined it for me.
I was thinking the same thing. I was trying to figure out what was I thinking of The Godfather and was I thinking of something else? And then I realized it was Curb Your Enthusiasm. But
Yeah.
then also is Curb Your Enthusiasm because I thought first was I hearing a mandolin and then because Maurice
You
Jarre
find
also
out what
did
instrument it
Doctor
is? What is
because
it?
Maurice Jarre did Doctor Zhivago, right? So
Sure. Yeah. That's what
and
he's most
then
famous for.
that's what he's like famous for. But then I think it's also either like a combination mandolin harpsichord or harpsichord also as
I just
well.
assumed it was like several keys on an organ or something, but
Yeah, it seemed like a harpsichord flourish a little bit to me as
sure.
well, too. Like I was confusing a harpsichord with a mandolin, and now it makes me wonder what instruments are used in Curb Your Enthusiasm in that
Well,
as
that
well.
song that he uses is, I looked it up. I think it's called Floric or something,
Yes,
and
yeah,
it's from 1973. So just to be clear, that's way after this movie. So if you're
right.
watching the use on Visage and going, why would they do the curb thing? No, that hadn't been established. And it's very well, and it hadn't even, you almost associate it with some kind of, I don't know what, like a calliope in a carousel now. It feels slightly Fellini-esque in the context, but it is creepy. Once you give yourself over to the film, I think I want to jump into the summary really quick. I don't know because it'll
Yes.
take me 5 minutes, and then I know I want to hear 10 minutes of what you got to say. Feel free to correct me, but I'm pretty sure this is what they meant, despite some disjointed edits. Eyes Without a Face begins with trees seen at night from a moving car driven by a nervous, scarf-wearing female driver, Louise, who pulls over by a river, removes a trench coat-wearing body from her car's back seat, and dumps the coat and body in a river. In a conference room, a scientist, Genesier, tells an audience that exchanging organs has become easier through a process that involves exsanguination. At a police station, two detectives discuss the case of the body and its missing face as if a scalpel had cut it off before escorting Dr. Genesier to the morgue, where he confirms the body is his daughter's. Genesier attends a funeral of his daughter alongside her fiancé Jacques and an unnerved Louise. Genesier passes his prohibitive gate to enter his palatial estate, where his adult daughter Christiane buries her face in her pillow as her father explains that everyone will think she's dead, but he'll eventually restore her face, but she has to now wear the mask to hide her disfigurement. I want to roll back a sec. I know I said he confirmed that's his daughter. It seems like in the movie he confirms it's not his daughter, but then I looked up the plot summary and it only makes sense that he is confirming. Do you understand that?
Oh yeah, no, I saw that. I caught that right away. That's why the second sort of viewing makes it more interesting to see what's going on in his head, is if he's trying to play along essentially with
Okay.
because he has this whole idea essentially of him trying to basically make her past tense essentially.
I get that, but did he tell her that's not my daughter, or did he tell her it is? What did
It
which
is, yeah. That's
Yes.
why
Okay.
that
So I
yeah,
said
it
it
was a whole
right.
that's
Okay.
why there was
It's
the
weirdly
father
close.
of the other daughter who basically that's the daughter who we see in the opening scene with the in the car
Okay.
back there.
I
So
guess it's the way the doctor says it that's weird. Okay. After Louise lovingly places the mask on a sad Christiane, we finally see her from the front, her large eyes being the only visible feature through a pale, passive, face-fitting mask that she wears as she walks somnolently through the house and calls Jacques, but hangs up without speaking. Louise approaches a young stranger named Edna in line for a movie, offers her a ticket, meets her later in a cafe, offers her a place to live, and drives her out beyond the tracks. Those tracks to the Genesier estate, which is misty, gothic, and echoes with distant German shepherds barking. Genesier meets Edna and exchanges niceties, sneaks up behind her, chloroforms her into unconsciousness, Kieran, drags her into his lab with Louise's help, and tells Louise this time he wants a more complete face, not cut, not fragmented. Christiane observes them, sneaks around, hugs one of the dozen caged dogs, enters the deserted lab, puts her hands on Edna's face, and prompts Edna to wake and scream as she and we see Christiane for the first time, complete with burn-like disfigurement. It's a little blurry though, but it is a cool shot. In a rather graphic scene with Louise's help, Genius, I thought this was graphic, even especially for 1960, but even now it would be hard to watch today a little.
So definitely a little
As
bit.
he's carving off and removing unconscious Edna's face. It's funny because I just saw Face Off, and I'm not even, I just happened to see it with my kid. I don't even
Uh-huh.
think they're quite that graphic, not quite. So what were you going to say?
Yeah, it's the act of doing it right in front of you is pretty ballsy, let's just say, for
Yeah.
any sort of
Yes, it
any
is.
period really. And
It
also
really is.
just the fact that there's so much what you realize when it's going on, the actual act of lifting the skin from the face, you realize, holy crap, so many different tweezers are being used, right? So many different forceps. There's like so many. There's like forceps forceps
Yeah.
basically, and then oh, more forceps.
It's
This
like
goes
watching
on.
it's like watching the Muppets as veterinarians or something. Oh, forceps again. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just pretty amazing just for that. You can, the last sort of reveal when it gets lifted, it's pretty obvious that it's not her face really, is exactly, or it's
Still.
not.
But that's actually one of the things I like about this movie compared to Face Off is that if you put on somebody else's face, it wouldn't look like that person anyway, which the movie
Exactly.
kind of acknowledges in a cool way, I think. Okay. At the kennel, Louise and Genevieve acknowledge mutual debts and fears, but soon Louise reports that Christiane is recovering. A face bandaged Edna awakes, knocks out Louise, prompts a chase, and jumps or falls out a window to her death. Genevieve puts Edna's body in the fake grave tomb for Christiane. At a breakfast table, we see the new Christiane, finally, whom Louise calls angelic, while Genevieve predicts Jock will eventually love the new her. In a montage of still close-ups, we see Christiane's nerves rejecting the new face. It almost reminded me of La Jetée, a movie that came out 2 years
Mm.
later, one of my favorites. In his lab, Genevieve works on a dog muttering he'll have to settle for this beastliness. Remasked Christian calls Jacques, says his name, hangs up, and argues with Louise that if she's going to be dead, she'd rather be dead. I'm summarizing. Jacques, who is also Genessier's clinic assistant, goes to the detectives, who aren't all that helpful, but when they're alone with a shoplifter, Paulette, they present a way she can avoid a trial, or a tribunal, as she calls it. Paulette dyes her hair and, via a chat with Jacques, checks into the clinic of Dr. Genessier, who tells her it would be a shame if he had to shave her head. After tests, Genevieve discharges Paulette from the clinic for having no abnormalities, and she calls her mom to tell her, oh, she's on her way. I'm on my way, in French. As Paulette walks home in the dark, Louise pulls up to offer her a ride as Jacques calls the police. In the lab, Louise interrupts Genevieve's carving of unconscious Paulette's face to tell him police are at the clinic. At the clinic, Genevieve tells the two detectives that after patients leave, they're out of his purview, and Jacques escorts them out to apologize to them. Sorry, I wasted your time. Back in the lab, Paulette awakens, screams, and prompts the rise of Christiane, who picks up a knife with which she unbinds Paulette's straps and then stabs in the neck an entering Louise, who says, why? I think that's actually the last line of the film, although you don't know it at the time. Louise dies, Paulette escapes, and Christiane lets loose the dozen or so dogs who maul to death the returning Genevieve. Christiane lets loose caged doves who hold her interest more than Genevieve's corpse that she's walking by with its severely disfigured face. Kieran, talk to me. You got many minutes. Tell me all the great things that I'm probably going to agree with you about this film.
Let's see. Where do I start actually? Because there's a lot to
You know,
parse about
I
this.
watched the Criterion. I'm afraid I started with the actress who plays Christiane, Edith Scope, and she was good, but also she wasn't really talking about anything but her part and her like being in makeup for 3 hours, and I was like, eh.
Yeah, that was interesting as well too. Didn't she have things like obvious things like meat was put on the doctor's body for the dog attack,
Sure,
basically?
on the
Uh,
stunned body.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she was a little nervous with her mask on, like with that scene where she's embracing the dogs
Mhm.
because some of them are just like overly friendly, and she was worried about the mask.
Sure. Yeah, those
And
are
if,
little details that are
yeah, little details. Like well, also she became a pretty big collaborator with Franju and other films
right.
after that as well.
Yeah,
So
but
that's probably why they got
I'm
to
less
interview her.
into I'm less into her experience and more into, I don't know, how people have received this film over the years.
And then she
Very
did
interesting.
mention like at that film when there was this film, I think actually all these films, one of the things they all share in common is either either lukewarm indifference all the way up
Yeah,
to
total.
rejection and
Yeah,
censorship,
okay,
and
you'll
basically.
never work in this town again.
Yeah, so it's they all share that as well. But she did
Yeah.
mention in her interview that apparently Cocteau was like a defendant of the film as well, for as far
Good.
as some of the people.
It was
I
a weird time in France. This was the time of Breathless, of the
Yeah,
400 Blows, of all these Hiroshima Mon Amour. I can see why it was not in tune with the critics at the time. And more in France than here, the critics do set the tone for audiences. So I can get
right. And
why
also wasn't
that.
Franju also like a critic also at the
Yeah,
Cahiers
there's
du Cinema as well, if I remember
right.
correctly? So
I bet he gave himself a good review. We'll see what's
yeah, but I think that's one of the other things too that we can talk about how he and other people, not just in France but elsewhere, would talk about the film in more terms of, say, what they would say in French, the fantastique rather than the horror, essentially.
Right. Yes. I
Yeah,
did
so even
catch Scobe saying that, for example. Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And Franju also, like, in there's that sort of documentary thing where he's interviewed and he talks about it more as part of the fantastique as
Sure.
well.
All of this stuff, and because we're gonna get to Hitchcock too, especially next episode, we could argue it's a thriller or and that's fine. I mean, we don't have to be so bound by genre, but I don't think it's not bad to call this a horror film, especially with the scalpel that you mentioned. And I don't know.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong. I don't know. To me, this encompasses at least what I've come to think of as horror, and sure, it can
Yeah.
encompass other things too.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. So then let's see. There's a lot of interesting things. I like there's another sort of trope, and it's also just unique to France and how in Paris everything is, or France, everything is inverted from what we think of in the US, where basically the suburbs are where basically the lower class oftentimes are at, whether everyone sort of higher classes up in the cities rather than vice versa. There's lots more sort of the inner city sort of dwellings in the US as opposed to everybody trying
Yeah,
to
there's
escape
some of
out
that,
to the suburbs.
Jigoku has some of that tension too, which is interesting.
Yes.
Some of that
Yeah,
mix.
it was interesting as well. And so you can
Yeah.
see like with the opening scene, there's this whole sort of, and it's also winter time as well, which is interesting, which is a nice sort of setting as well.
Dead trees
And
never hurt.
dead trees everywhere, like in the isolation that you see, there's a point of no return that
Yep.
happens, which is what Edith goes through when she gets taken to the mansion, essentially. We didn't, we,
Yeah. I want to go
yeah,
driving with Louise at night with those dead trees going by. It just seems like such a creepy place to be. It just
right.
it can never go well. It can't turn, we're not going to turn right into some fun Fellini party. It's if you're,
Exactly. And of course, speaking of Fellini and other sort of, say, Italian slash German slash Swiss actresses as
sure.
well, Alida Valli, I of course knew her very well from a particular Italian film by a particular Italian director that we'll be talking about later,
Mm,
involving a particular ballet academy, let's just
now
say.
we're talking.
And so I
Okay.
knew her from
Thanks for
that
setting
film. So
that up.
obviously, when I saw her immediately in the movie, I thought she's up to no good, obviously.
Clearly, you can't trust.
Yeah, clearly. And her arc and her character is actually much more nuanced as well, too. It's
It
interesting as
is, and
someone who is,
she plays it really well because you sense
yeah,
she has a secret, but also you're not sure what it is. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on.
yeah. She tries to symbolize basically what everyone is going through, at least in that house, is, basically trying to please or succeed the father figure, essentially, right? With what
Yes,
the father figure is doing for
yes,
them.
yes,
And
yes.
so Louise symbolizes basically this true believer in a sense of, and she's not flesh and blood either, but she's a true believer in that what happened to her operation wise was a success for the most part, except for the pearl choker that she wears to hide a certain thing, basically, which gives her
Wow.
away,
More choker
right?
themes coming back with Black Sunday too. The choker.
And yeah, and Jigoku and everything involving strangulation also,
Sure,
just in
thank
general,
you.
right? So she represents basically that sort of true believer, essentially, that Christiane would like to be and wants to be, essentially, and it's just not happening as well. And so it's
Yeah.
basically a long treatise of sort of the sins of the father and the father
Yes,
trying
it
to
is that.
rectify those sins and making the sins even worse, essentially, and compounding those sins by creating other sins.
I never understood how did Christiane get her face burned off in the first place? Was it
There's
because
a car accident. There, she talks
okay,
about it specifically. There's,
okay,
and
sorry, I
not only
missed
that, but the
right.
car accident is basically the
The
father's
father's
own
fault.
negligence.
Right.
Basically,
Yeah.
the father is considered. She considers him, as much as the love there is between them, she considers him still this controlling character. And he says about him, he always wanted to control the road, even, right? So when he's
What about
driving,
a remake where she's just born with a somewhat plain or not perfect face and he tries to fix her and it keeps going wrong and then they're like after a while her whole face is melted off and he's okay, but I'm gonna fix it this time.
right?
That'd be another way to do it. But
Yeah,
anyway.
that would be another way to do it. That's like a variation, a little bit of what's going on with a particular film that's at the Oscars this year as
Oh,
well, you
yeah.
could say.
No kidding.
So,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
but it's interesting
I
this.
thought of that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm trying
We
to think about
probably
some other
should
things.
wrap up on this one in a couple minutes, but go ahead.
Sure, we can talk about specifically, or at least definitely about, there's also a lot of post-World War II sort of symbolism going on here with obviously why they were talking about don't show this doctor being too mad because the doctor is
Mhm.
doing this surgery basically and removing skin, doing operations on people essentially. And we can talk about how that's reminiscent of what went on basically in World War II in the Nazi camps as well. They also allude to French collaboration as well on anti-Semitism as well. You can talk
Mhm.
about how he talks about restoring his daughter to her true face, which was ton vrai visage.
Okay.
And
What was
vrai
that?
visage is like the term that apparently that the Nazi sympathizers in French
Oh,
used during the
wow.
war to describe racial and national purity.
Oh, wow.
So there's a little bit of that. There's a lot of that going on as well. There's many different sources that sort of cover that as well. But the book that I was looking at that was interesting was about how Eyes Without a Face, because of its subject matter and what it does, and also being an art film, it's a unique film in that it's like one of the newer sort of films that straddles both the avant-garde, the art, and trash horror aesthetics all in one
I
film as
love
well.
that is like
But it's
can't reproduce that. Yeah.
no, but it's like a singular piece, but also paves the way for other sort of art horror, art house
Yes.
films. And the book by Joan Hawkins, which is called Cutting Edge, she mentions basically when she wrote the book, it was about 2000. So this is around the same time when DVDs were in the vogue and everyone was buying things from different video catalogs and things like that. And she mentioned how, ironically enough, when people were selling their video catalogs, oftentimes with the European films, they would never separate horror from the art films in their listings, essentially. Everything was all jumbled
Yeah.
together
I'm
as
okay with
well.
that. Yeah.
So she had that sort of idea and made her think about maybe there's something to do with just like the European art horror films or horror films from that period as well and how yeah, so it's an interesting book and I recommend that as well. But there are
Nice.
other sort of things that we've talked about that come
Great.
from other sources. Yeah, there's
Cool.
all the stuff from Criterion is great as well for that reason.
Sure. Anything else? Now,
There's a ton of little things. I think
yeah. I
I thought
noticed this movie influenced a whole truckload of movies. There's so many movies that like especially in the 60s, like right off the bat, that were like that name this is
yeah, I don't think we've talked enough about how Edith Sco's performance is just really amazing and just the actual,
yeah.
just
Okay.
that the mask work as well is
Yeah.
pretty epic. You notice how the first time we see her wearing the mask, she's basically speechless. And then the second time that she has to put on the mask, then it's like a part of her skin and she actually is talking through the mask. And there's that sort of weird thing where the mask is basically a part of her face in a way because she's
That's
talking through
clever.
there.
That's
So
very
it's
clever.
and there's the tears coming down while she's doing that. It's
Wow.
pretty epic as well. There's one bit of like dialogue like early when she was being told by her father to get in the habit of wearing it of
Yeah, I
her
remember
mask and she
that. I
says the
remember that.
habit.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about
Yeah.
that. It was like implying that she's walled away from society like a nun, essentially,
Wow.
involuntarily
So
taking a vow of
that
chastity.
word habit translates.
And
Oh,
she's
yeah.
like making a vow of chastity because she's like away from her fiance. Her fiance thinks she's
Wow.
lost and all that.
Wow.
Yeah, lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about. I recently also saw The Skin I Live in, the Almodovar film, and he said that was heavily, and you can tell.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, that's one of many films that, and you can see why filmmakers are drawn to this kind of thing because it's like you get to play, and the actors are drawn to it too, because you play a faceless person, but not a faceless person. The idea of switching identities and this kind
Right.
of very intimate, awful way. It's funny too that we just got lucky with the order of the films, but like I was reading how John Carpenter with Halloween said, I think we got when we had no money and we were making the Michael Myers mask, the original. We didn't have any money, so we just give me a featureless mask. He's like, I think we figured the one that we made was basically based on Eyes Without a Face, although we don't know. But he says that, but I'm like, but why is it that when I watch Black Sunday, it looks exactly like the mask in Halloween? Yeah, that is just okay. I don't know, but fine.
Yeah, there's that. There's also it's supposedly modeled after William Shatner anyway, too, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, that's funny.
so
Sure, why not? Yeah, this is a special film. You can
yeah.
tell by the way we discuss it. There's no doubt this is a very special film that everybody should at some point see for. And I love the ending too. I noticed because I sometimes look at the Wikipedias and I saw that the Wikipedia summary didn't even mention the fact that his face has been ripped to shreds,
Hmm.
by the dogs. I'm like, no, you need that in your plot summary. I'm sorry. You don't bother with 10 paragraphs on this and then leave that out. But
Not only that, but basically you could say that the end of the film was called more like eye that's left his face
oh,
because that's what it is. Basically, there's this eye that's protruding out of there,
they're
basically.
definitely pivoting to gore. I feel like if James Whale were around at the time, he would have been like, "Oh, what I could have done with these loosened standards." That's one vibe I sometimes get.
Yeah, this is a few years away from a particular H.G. Lewis film. It's not that
Sure.
far away.
I'm not saying that the standards are all the way down, but like you said, you can see them happening in here
Yes.
and in Peeping Tom.
Hmm.
Is that a good enough
Of
segue for
course.
Peeping
That's
Tom?
perfect.
I only because gotta watch that clock. Uh,
Yeah.
I already mentioned the Archers. They were not known for horror, not even close. I was watching the Martin Scorsese intro to Peeping Tom on Criterion. He's always fun. And I know that The Red Shoes is one of his favorite films. I actually like Peeping Tom better than The Red Shoes, but he was very influenced as a kid by The Red Shoes Scorsese. And he was like, in his intro, he's like, how could the same filmmaker have made these two films? They're not the same. And he's like, but then I realized what they are. They're about how how difficult performance is, how difficult it is to make a film, to put something together, and being an artist and the creative toll it takes, and it sucks everything out of you if you're not careful. And that through line we keep seeing again. And you could see he could really relate to that. And I think that's really, I think for me, it's like I sense that, yes, in PB Time. It's funny that this movie was so obscene for its time that like that I don't mean to like advance fast forward too far, but like Michael Powell was basically unable to make another film, partly because it didn't do well, but also
Right.
because it was like, why did you make this tawdry material? So basically he ran to Australia where they have no standards. But yeah, I was looking at things. I'd always known things about this film. I'm not sure if I'd seen it. I guess I had. Just the production, it was I'm so glad they made this in color. I don't want to seem like you always have to make a movie in color, but there's something
Mm.
about this being in color that really I think accents its themes because he's so into photography. He's so into trying to capture. So I guess for me, it's like the guy, Mark, is so into capturing something, and yet even though he's getting it, he's not getting it.
Right.
That's this tension all throughout the film. And so that's why I want it to be in color because if it's in color, then he is getting the image. Like my kid was like every 5-year-old thinks this. Wait, was the world in black and white when at some point, and then the world went to color? How kids think that. But that's what I mean. It feels like that a little. So my point is that, yeah, I'm glad it's in color because then it's vibrant. He should be seeing everything. Somehow he's not even happy with that. And that makes for a great little slap.
Right. And isn't also one of the things that they were excoriating Michael Powell for was the fact that he played a particular character in the movie and also the
Sure.
child version of Mark was actually his own son, if I remember correctly as well too.
Wow, that part I did not know, although
Yeah.
that really says something. Wow, so that is that is a great production note. I missed that one. That's a great one. Wow, got any more nuggets like that before I jump into the plot?
Nothing besides that. The find that particular, it's funny with that particular production company producing Peeping Tom. It makes he was always under the assumption for that people were aware that he was making more of a black comedy than a horror movie. Also,
Yeah,
Michael Powell was,
right.
and maybe that was a little too sophisticated for the company that used to basically produced all those Carry-On films.
Okay.
That's what the company's known
Yeah.
for. So I don't know if you've ever seen any of those films. There's less subtle Benny Hill films, basically.
Wow. Okay.
So
There's not a lot of room for less subtle. So I know where you're setting the bar, and it's pretty low.
yeah, it's
I
interesting
think,
that we
yeah.
have.
Right.
There's also the interesting thing
Go
where
ahead.
I always forget with Helen, the actress playing
Yeah.
Helen, Anna Massey,
Anna
and she
Massey,
also
right.
plays a sort of like a similar kind of character with a similar plot over in Frenzy, also later
Right.
on as
I'm glad you
well.
bring up Hitchcock so that I'm not because I feel like I'm like beating a dead horse with this, but there's no way I believe that at this time in 1958, 59, if you're Michael Powell or Pressburger or anybody like David Lean, there's no way you're not seeing a new Hitchcock film. I'm sorry, but you just are. They are seeing it within a few months after it coming to Britain. They probably got a special screening arranged for them, but whether they did or not, they saw Vertigo. And I can't help but think that this thing of scopophilia, this thing of being intensely attracted. What I'm saying is that I think as big a fan as I am of Vertigo, I kind of love that Peeping Tom takes some of those themes to this whole other level. I like that they foreground in the text. You actually have a guy coming there saying scopophilia or whatever. So that, I mean, I'm not sure that name had really shown up in movies before, and I think it really says something. It gives Mark an extra dimension, which you need him to have, because other than that, he's getting really creepy.
But you understand as well what's going on. There's a lot of we can talk about the pathology of Mark once we like discuss the film a little bit more, but
Yeah,
it's
should I
pretty
just jump
fascinating.
in and then you'll explain everything I got wrong at the end, which is good.
Oh, I mean,
No,
I'll talk sort of the one thing that with Peeping Tom that I got intimidated by was like the sort of like wealth of background and other things, other discussion about this film. This is a very well discussed film, so it was got to be a little intimidating to sort of
that's a
figure
really
out.
good point. Much like
So
Psycho, there's a term for that in scholarship. It's over-determined or over-attenuated. Yes, it is. People like to talk about Peeping Tom, and so should they. At least it's you know what? Good, because it's a strong film. It bears up to a lot of analysis.
agreed. Yeah.
Let's talk about why that would be, and therefore let's actually say what they're talking about. Peeping Tom begins on an extreme close-up of a blue eye startled. From the shaky camera's point of view of an unseen man, he approaches a prostitute, follows her upstairs, passes a landlady on the stairs, watches the person he's following undress, and causes her to scream, "No!" In a screening room, he watches this same home movie as credits roll. On the street during the day, the cameraman, we now see him, Mark, is recording the post-mortem ambulance activity when a bystander asks him what paper he's with, and he says, "The Observer." Mhm.
Yeah.
At a news shop, the owner reminds Mark what that people pay for prurience, soon evidenced by a porno purchasing old man who turns his back on a preteen girl paying for a candy bar. Upstairs in a photo studio, Mark takes photos of and chats with two erotically dressed young women, second of whom has a face scar that Mark insists on filming despite policy. In the lobby of Mark's building, a young, normal-looking neighbor, Helen Stevens, leaves her 21st birthday party to introduce herself to Mark, who invites her up to his flat, where he awkwardly admits that because of his father's death, he is her landlord. In his dark screening room, Helen won't let Mark film her as she watches old home movies of Mark as a boy, which I guess now Kieran has told you these are actually of Michael Powell's child. At first in bed, this kid is scared at a lizard. Then he's looking at his mother's corpse, then her funeral, burial, and a bikini shot of his mom's successor, as we're told, seen in a pan up from feet by a camera that Mark's dad gives to him. After Helen turns off the projector in the living room, Mark says his father filmed his whole childhood. Before a party guest, I think his name's Tony, we later learn, comes to return Helen to her party. On a professional movie set, an actress, Dion, I mean, it looks like Diane to me, but I think they say Dion, repeats more than 50 takes of fainting as off camera, her stand-in, Viv, smiles at Mark while confirming their date that night. Film crew leaves as Viv walks through a creepily empty E stage. Ah, one more like actress walking through creepy, vast spaces. That we've seen plenty of those already this season.
Hmm.
Until coming upon Mark, and then it's fine. Who films her dancing about the deserted set for a while, lets her take the camera for a bit, proposes she read on camera to a scenario where someone is trying to kill her and moves a cap off of his tripod leg to reveal a sharp metal blade that backs her into a trunk as we cut from her. No. At Mark's flat, Mark interrupts Helen reading his father's book to give her a birthday present, a brooch that she puts on while asking him if he could take photos for her first ever children's book about a magic camera. Even though the publisher may not pay because the photos seem impossible. I was hoping they would do more with those, Kieran, but let's talk about that later. On the
Mhm.
film set, Mark makes sure to use his own camera to film Dion's scream and faint in seeing the trunk opening. It's dead body, Viv. And then to film the investigating detectives. At their makeshift office, Mark volunteers his camera and alibi and escorts a detective to the set, where detectives decide that Viv's murder matches that of the prostitute. And Mark, in the rafters, films them but loses pens from his pocket that give away his presence. At Helen's flat, Helen's blind mother jokes about being laid out and Mark spending so much time at their window, but after he enters and Helen tells Mark she's more concerned that his camera's like another limb, persuading him to leave it at home while they eat out and discuss her project of faces, presumably with eyes. Back in their common lobby, stops Helen from filming herself with his camera because he says what he films, he always loses. Helen briefly kisses Mark goodnight. In Mark's film studio, Mark is surprised by Helen's mother, who, even blind, sees Mark for who he is, prompting at first a near attack and then a repulsed insistence that she depart. But as she goes, she is undeterred by his promises never to film Helen and warns Mark to get help or stop seeing Helen, or one of them will leave the building. Back on the film set, Dion freaks during a routine scene, prompting the hiring of psychiatrists whom Mark chats up offstage. Later, a detective grills the shrink who honestly says, he told Mark about his familiarity with Mark's father's work, about peeping toms and scoptophilia and how it could be cured. Mark rings up his new shop boss to hurriedly arrange a 6 o'clock photo session with Millie, who in the film studio complains that she rearranged her schedule only to see him filming a detective outside the window, who eventually watches Mark lock up, hails a cab, and stops at a payphone where this is the detective. He stops at a payphone where he tells his colleague there's nothing but lewd photography that he saw. Helen enters Mark's film studio, watches what's in the projector, which remains unseen to us, and screams with horror into the arms of an entering Mark, who admits he killed them, presumably Viv and the prostitute, but he won't kill Helen as long as he doesn't see her frightened. At his insistence, she stays in the shadows as he confesses killing with his tripod leg spike, while a mounted mirror made the victims watch their own deaths. Quote, and if death has a face, they saw that too. Unquote. As the police encroach, Mark tosses something that smashes near them as one cop says, it's only a camera, and another says, only? I thought that was a great moment. Mark apologizes to Helen for not doing more to get her faces, impales himself on his usual apparatus, and dies. The police enter and help Helen as the projector plays an old film of Mark's father telling him he's a good boy. Okay, Karen, we do have time. This is a special film. As you
It
said,
is.
a lot written about it. I don't know how we're going to summarize it in 10 minutes. We're not.
Yeah, I don't
Give
know.
me your favorite
So
highlights. Yeah.
we know that the actor playing Mark was not the first or even the second choice for this movie,
And to be
but
honest, I don't know that he's the perfect actor for this project
I
either.
actually think he is, and I think
Okay.
unintentionally,
All
I
right.
don't know if Michael Powell was thinking, is it appropriate that we have this person who supposedly an English-born person with this, shall we say, Peter Lorre about him?
They talked about, or at least, sorry, Laura Mulvey said Fritz Lang's M was a big influence. Sorry, keep talking.
Yes, Laura, yeah, yeah, and I think because of that, I think it's apropos also that this particular actor who just reminds me so much of M and just Peter Lorre because of how he talks as well. So I think once they
Why
did
do
the
you
cast
think
as
that,
well,
Kieran?
yeah.
What are
So
you talking about?
I don't know. He was, yes, obviously his camera was named Stimpy. Yes. Sure, that's
Idiot.
a coincidence. But anyway, so that's yeah, so I think that is tremendous. I was wondering about like the timing of things about what I always think about certain plot directions things movies take and how if they wanted a different direction, a movie would just be shorter. This movie would be shorter. This wouldn't be a film basically if his psychologist father basically wanted to write a series of books about children and happiness.
Exactly. Goes back to your paternalism theme. This guy is doing everything that his father wanted and didn't want. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. So there's that as well. And possibly I'm trying to think about it in terms of whether maybe just happiness as like a psychology of discovering happiness or anything about
yeah,
happiness was more, even if I don't think it was really talked about necessarily as other like stronger emotions like fear was. Like the idea of pursuing happiness and the psychology of it. I don't think Norman Vincent Peale came into like the forefront of people's minds until later on in the 60s, I think.
yeah,
So yeah, so that was interesting to see that was his life's work as well. And he's this it's
yeah.
he's
Sure.
less of a he's his influence looms, you could say, even larger than what happens, or just as large with Christiane, only you barely see him or hear him, except you hear the last words are spoken
By
by
him,
him,
he
right?
does get the last word, doesn't
He
he?
gets the last word as well, which is interesting. Did you recognize the dirty old man in the book who in the shop who went to ask for the pictures?
I saw him try to not let that 12-year-old girl see him
Yes.
look, but I don't, but I didn't know.
So he was in Dead of Night. So
Okay,
there was that whole story
okay.
about the race car driver and the hearse person saying room for one more.
Okay. Oh, was he the driver?
That's the same actor as well. And he also was a screenwriter as well, or a
Wow,
writer. He
that's
apparently
cool.
also wrote The Thief of Baghdad.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
I teach that film, Thief of Baghdad, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was interesting sort
Wow.
of symmetry
That's
there.
cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's both Helen and her mother have this really fascinating relationship as well. They're mother and daughter, and yet they're also like roommates, friends as well. The drinking, all the drinking, so much drinking that her mother, and has throughout the film. It's basically she treats her daughter as basically, oh, it's just my friend who drinks, basically, rather than oh, it's my mother who has this drinking problem. At least that's
But
the way I
she's
looked at it as
fun.
well.
She's fun the way that like Olivia Colman would be now, like in a movie,
Hmm.
like that kind of fun where she's so alive in the movie.
She's
Why?
probably one of my favorite. Yeah, she's
Right.
basically those women are probably my favorite characters in the film,
Sure, sure.
really, for many different reasons. Let's see. I'm trying to think about. I think you might remember like how I was talking about soundtracks for silent films better if it's with a full orchestra than rather whether it's with a lone piano. In this case, I would think the lone piano that happens so often in this particular film is very striking.
It is.
That's the pun is intended, and also just the fact that the piano also there are certain things where it happens where it seems when it just stops and starts up as if the piano is basically in the room essentially as
Yeah.
the scene is being shot, which
That's
is kind of
something that's a
fascinating too.
great point. Yeah. And we didn't even need Barbara Steele to be playing it, for example. Yeah. No, I'm saying,
Exactly.
no, that's good. That's a really good point. I want to quickly mention that the reason I was comparing it to Vertigo, now that we've talked, now I feel like I can say, is yes, it's about a
Yeah,
voyeur, but it also, much like Vertigo, is about us as the audience as voyeurs. I think that
right.
and it indicts us in the way that Vertigo also does. It's not as apples to apples as I'm making it sound, but it's apples to a fruit that's not that different either.
Yes.
Um, yeah, but I love that. That's the thing is, it's not if you're gonna imitate a film, believe me, Vertigo's you could do a lot worse. And no, but I think and honestly, yeah, it's good. Anyway, yeah,
There are other things too. I mean, from what I
please.
understand as well, there wasn't so much with fiction films, there wasn't so much of a hidden camera sort of aspect to
Yeah,
them as there was
yeah,
in this film as well. At least
yeah.
in England, there wasn't so much on location shooting as much for some of the fiction
Right.
films too. They're talking about Soho, and that's probably what made it more interesting was because they covered this
Right.
particular neighborhood
And right.
and it's very working classness as well.
And
And
that's
this is all
where yes, sorry, finish working
Oh,
class.
and that's also where, we're about to be at the beginning. We might have been already at the beginning a little bit of like kitchen sink kind of dramas that were
That's
happening in
then,
England at the
yeah,
time as
right.
well.
Saturday morning, Sunday night is just,
Right. And then
it's
The
just
Sporting
on
Life
Saturday.
later.
Just totally
Right.
love it.
And
But
there's the
the
Angry Young Man films before
yeah,
that, or Angry Young
right.
Man
And you could
plays.
argue this is a comment. But it's true. That's where Peeping Tom is actually better than Vertigo to me, is because it actually foregrounds the apparatus of the camera. I'm glad you said that.
Yes,
Made me think. You start right away with that shot of him with the 16 millimeter in his vest, and then he's approaching the. I mean that, and you keep having like him. He keeps needing to satisfy this camera urge, and then turn it into a death thing, and like that. Yeah, I think that's good. That are not good, but it's good that there's a film like that. I think a lot of films would then take off from that. A lot of
right.
Hollywood films would seem to bring up this is the bitter, angry version of maybe a lot of filmmakers saw themselves in Mark. I don't know.
Possibly, yeah. It's funny we were talking about two films in a row now where the logic that police are like employing in the films leads them to like, almost screw up basically and not catch what's actually really going on. More so in Eyes Without a Face, but it's happening a little bit in Peeping Tom as well. And also two people getting killed in the throat as well, different ways as well
Mm,
too. So
we're getting some throat kills. Yeah, here, wait, let me do one right here just to get a sense of yeah, I get right. And I guess there's a whole documentary by Chris Rodley, a very British psycho, that basically says Peeping Tom and Psycho are the similar. Yes,
okay.
yes and no. Whatever. They say that they're mild-mannered serial killers who are obsessed with their parents. I guess that's a new type. I guess that's the angry young man, but more repressed. And this is where it goes.
And supposedly very slightly related, Robert Bloch's novel is supposedly to a real true crime, which particular person by the name of Ed Gein, who's going to be factored
Well,
more
that's just
into
it.
a certain
Sure.
film that we'll be talking about later.
Since Peeping Tom actually came out first and supposedly it got savage in the press, which apparently is one reason Hitchcock released Psycho without a press screening, which was smart of him. And
Mm.
they didn't normally do that. But because of that, there's at least one critic, Isabel McNeil, who considers Peeping Tom the very first slasher film. So, I mean, it could be that, but if that's something.
Yeah, I think it would. Yeah,
I
there are like
mean,
a few other sort of
I'm with you though. Fritz Lang's M is a slasher film, or it is. It's just
there's that. There's always like the sort of the old like the murder mysteries where one by one people are killed off. There's and then there are
yeah, thank
none.
you. That's a
There's
really good
that as
point.
well.
But this
So
feels serial killery
yes,
before that was ever coined as a term.
yeah, agreed.
Um, yeah, no, and anyway, even if it didn't inspire anything, it's a heck of a film. I mean, for so many reasons. I think you're right. I like everybody's acting except Karl Heinz Bohm's.
Oh, that's funny. I
He's
like him a lot,
fine.
actually. Yeah.
I guess maybe he's fine. I don't know what it is. He's got one thing he's doing for me. It's fine. The thing he's doing.
But that thing is basically Peter Lorre for me, and that's fine with me.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
Okay.
also, I don't know. I I don't know. I think he's pretty affecting, especially with what's going on with, especially towards the end. I think the
Yeah.
last 15 minutes or so with him and with Helen are probably like the standout scenes, I think, in the film as well.
I see
Um,
that. Yeah. It's good because you really, the first time you see it, no way to know if Helen's going to live or die. That's some tension right there.
and seeing the actual reveal as to what everybody is actually seeing before they die is a nice reveal too. That
So
in the film.
you're right. By the way, I guess the police tell us that Mark killed Millie, right? The model that he ran to go see,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's
They
the
don't
police.
show it to us.
They don't show it. Basically, his boss, basically at the bookstore, is the one who tells them.
Okay, okay, that's right. So yeah, I think in another film that might have been a little clearer, but maybe it's good for it not to be shown. Yeah, and I think there's a lot. I think it's good with the apparatus being deadly and all that. I
Right.
guess I think this supports a lot of themes in a clever way. Um, yeah, I don't know. This is an excellent film.
It is. Yeah.
What else? Do we need to say anything else before moving to the next thing? We, there's we got a
I think
couple
we've
minutes.
covered just a lot. I mean, yeah, we've covered all the
Covered
influences. I
big
think
ones.
even like Edgar Wright's last film was influenced a little bit by the one Last Night in Soho.
It's just a shame this was not as appreciated in its own times. It should have been.
Yes.
These guys are like, let's make horror. Because it does seem, I don't know, if you look at what's going on in the States with, I don't know what, from everything, the House on Haunted Hill, but also other Hitchcock films, but or if horror adjacent, okay, we could make this. And then it turns out, no, horror adjacent's not working. Although I guess the Hammer films were doing okay at the same time. So it's
They were
never,
doing quite well, yeah. But
so
I think
it's never uncomplicated.
that whole Hammer thing, everyone had that had its own sort of baggage being labeled a Hammer film as well.
It was like a B film. It couldn't play
Yeah,
everywhere. Whereas Peeping Tom was going to get a major release. And I think that
exactly.
problem is that the critics just were not ready for this. I personally, I go back and I'm like, you don't even need this scene of the guy in the porno shop, but I'm so glad they have it in there because that they're like foregrounding. Look, people do this. People
Hmm.
like, and I think that was something you couldn't even say. I've seen so many film classes tell students for the first time that like that's or tell students, hey, Psycho was the first movie to ever have a toilet in it. And it was like, yeah, that's not exactly good that it took till 1960 for people to just be that honest. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that like you couldn't even have had a guy going into a porno shop. So I'm saying that in its own way, this was also pushing the envelope, and I think in a very effective way usually. Although
Yes,
when it comes
agreed.
to pushing the envelope, Jigoku, woo, does that see? How's that for a segue? Is that going
That's a
to?
great segue,
Okay, all
yes.
right, great. And we can, of course, go back to either of our first two films anyway. Goku, it was like the first film on our list where I was actually like, okay, no, I can't show this to my 12-year-old. Like, I cannot, at least not now. You give him a few years, but actually flayed bodies and other things. And I'm not exhausting the list here by any stretch. It's funny how, as I said, I watched L'Inferno for the E list, and a lot of that is similar, but boy, and sure. But boy, does this ever take it to, excuse me, another level. And I don't necessarily mean one of Dante's levels either. This is like crazy what you're seeing
It's
here.
pretty crazy, and also the advantage of having it on color as well too
Yep,
helps.
this color is like nothing else. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is really, it's funny. It feels like this. I don't know if Jigoku could have been made in the West at this time. You almost had to have this kind of not anti-Christian, but like we don't care what Christians think kind of thing about it going on. Or is it
yeah, which is
humanity?
oddly enough, even though the sort of like devil sort of narratives that are being explored here are Western as well, oddly
Yeah,
enough. There's a
yeah.
combination of Western and Eastern as well, which is an interesting mixture that they try to put together in this movie.
By then, Akira Kurosawa had well established that if you wanted to mine Western texts for certain things, that was fine. He had
Yeah,
already been doing it in a
that's
much
true.
less bloody film, for example, called Throne of Blood. He'd already, so it was like, and I'm not, he wasn't the only one, and there were other, but the other big ones, Ozu and Mizoguchi, their movies play like they don't really care that much about the West, which is fine. And I don't need them to care about the West either. I'm just
Right.
saying that like this movie does not play like it doesn't care about the West. I would not go that far. I think it does play like it cares, but creepy, weird. Like it's almost like a fun house. Like I mean, I don't even know. I don't know how to describe the final third of this movie. I'm going to describe it, but what I say
Mhm.
is not even going to be close to the experience of watching it in this case.
I think we'll probably talk about it more, but there's this sort of push and pull between the big city, Tokyo, and the countryside also too. And you
Yes,
could
that
say
is,
Tokyo like symbolizes a Western influence more, and then the countryside brings more about the Western influence is not there as much, obviously.
yeah. I read this one thing so I watched some of the Criterion stuff, and one of the
Yep.
guys said the word horror didn't even exist in Japan at the time. Uh,
Yeah, he was one of the directors. He directed a particularly excellent film that's on Criterion you can check called Cure. That's also very
yeah,
good as
right.
well.
So I
So
don't know what they thought of this. Obviously, but I don't think Kieran, you and I are doing anything wrong to pigeonhole it into horror. Come on, it's pretty
I'm
horror.
the last person to say that's a bad thing. So
I
yeah.
read this thing, I loved it, that said Nakagawa asked this writer Miyagawa to write the script. It was called Heaven and Hell for the producer named Okura, and Okura read it and said, where's the heaven in the script?" And Miyagawa, the screenwriter, was like, "Oh, we'll put that in the sequel."
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love that. That's so good. Yeah, but it was not that well received. We can get to that later. Anyway, yeah, I'm just looking at, I mean, this was a kind of a high budget film for its time-ish. I
It's a
mean,
high budget film for that particular studio as well. This
yes, for
studio
Shintoho.
had some interesting successes. It started out being like relatively respectable. There was, I think, Stray Dog was produced by them, for instance. And then later on, started to follow on hard times. And then this particular Okugawa producer came in, and he was Roger Corman's id almost in a way. And so
Yeah, really.
yeah, he was.
Good.
And basically the director, Nakagawa, basically said essentially basically what became his go-to producer for horror films through this particular studio, which I thought was like a longer name of Toho Studios, the name Shin Toho, but actually it's an entirely different studio. So yeah,
Okay.
it was interesting to see that.
I guess I should mention that Nakagawa had already made a lot of interesting films, including other horror films before this. So
Yes.
they are interesting. I mean, you go back and look. Obviously, Godzilla had existed before this. We don't necessarily consider that horror. That's not him. I'm just looking at his resume. I mean, it's actually a bunch of fascinating films because he's got a bunch of vampire. I mean, there's all kinds of, but I think I can see why this film has become this. I don't know what. It is the first film you want to go to from Nakagawa because it's there's so many ways in which he's refined his style here. He's using the darkness. I feel there's all kinds of reasons that this is a great introduction to what he can do.
Yeah. His other film before that apparently is also like an important sort of film just because the source material is basically a bit of kabuki theater which is this film called Ghost Story of Yotsuya.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's a
Okay.
bit of kabuki theater that was from the 19th century that also just became remade by so many other different directors in Japan throughout history, including like it had its own silent film. So that's how far back this story had been made and remade as well. And so
Yeah.
his version
Right.
apparently was interesting as well for that reason. So, and I think that's what probably the success of that film, I believe, is what made them go all out for what they did with this film.
That's just it. It does go all out. Not even really, that's what's really, it really goes places once, like it's moving along, and then it's like a lot of films, good, but in a good way. But then in the final third, you're like, wow, can they top this? And then they keep doing that. But it's almost, in some ways, it's in harmony with a blockbuster film. I don't like whatever, like a superhero film, because there's just like, it just keeps topping itself in the final third. You're like, holy crap, can they do that? Can they show that? Oh my God.
You could argue that a little bit of a third of like sort of introducing like all of the characters that when the lead comes home essentially, all the characters that get introduced slowly that can bog down a little bit. That's the only criticism I might have. But everything that sort of happens to them, they all get subjected to the final third. So that makes it all worth it essentially, because
Exactly.
it's
There's
all
always
just
a
a
reason.
cast of just even more unsavory characters, right?
Yeah, it's good because once you're in the final third, you don't know which like row of dead bodies or whatever is gonna contain one of the people we saw earlier or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, but before I just jump into this plot, I want to it's this film is dark in a way that you don't think I'm saying it's dark. It's actually dark. They're in a lot of the first half of the movie is in literally very dark rooms where you can't actually
Mhm.
see anybody except the two act or anything other than the two actors speaking. They got lights on them, but it's really and at first that almost registers as a mistake until you realize, oh, okay, now I kind of getting a sense of where this is going. Now, it's not an absolute thing because you have the rope bridge and broad daylight and other,
Mhm.
but still, it's quite striking. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, it comes into mind. I don't know if you've seen like the newest Nosferatu
Hmm.
yet.
I'm about to. No, sorry.
Yeah, so everyone told me, and which is why I went and saw it in the theater, was because in the theater it was easier for you to see like the different shades of black essentially in the
Okay.
film.
Yeah.
It's very particular about those shades
I have
that
to
might
keep
make
the
it,
lights off.
yeah, a bit more of a challenge when it's streaming, let's just say, because
Yeah. All right.
that's so it reminded me of that and made me hope one day that this particular film will get an actual like Blu-ray release or just a higher, better
Sure.
transfer, let's just say.
All right. I'm jumping in. Is that
Okay,
okay? Jump in
of
with you.
course.
We begin with a rock putting the final nail on a coffin that is placed inside a cremator as the title, Jigoku, seems to arise from the flames. Credits appear beside scantily clad young women. This almost prefigured the Bond films. Over abstract imagery of mannequins in pools and glowing pathways, a narrator speaks existentially about law or religion punishing sinners. In a college lecture hall, Professor Yajima cites Indian sutras for a Japanese concept called naraku as two young men whisper in the back row, one of them, Tamura, gossiping about Yajima's shady past in Malaya, and the other, Shiro, flashing back on his evening in the Yajima's parlor as they congratulate him on his engagement to their only daughter, Yukiko, until Tamura oddly arrives with an incriminating wartime photo. Driving at night on a road that Shiro insists they take, Tamura bets Shiro that Yukiko is pregnant just before he runs his car over a drunk man. Tiger Kiyoshi of the Gondo Gang, we know that because he yells, "I'm Tiger Kiyoshi of the Gondo Gang," and Tamura refuses to stop the car despite Shiro begging. In a rather dark house, Tamura reads to Shiro the news article about Kiyoshi's death and says they don't have to worry. In another very dark house, I guess I do mention this in my summary, two barely lit women lie on futons discussing the gang paid funeral, their awareness of the car's number, police ignorance, and their need to kill Kiyoshi's killers. Shiro confesses to Yukiko and insists over her objections that they take a taxi to the police station. At night, the taxi hits a puddle and crashes into a pole, killing Yukiko. At the Yajimas, the father dismisses Shiro's guilt, but the mother demands Shiro give back her daughter. At a dark strip club, Shiro sleeps with Yoko, who reminds him about a 9 o'clock appointment. At Tenjoin Old Age Home, as titles say, far from Tokyo, Shiro meets Kinuko Sachiko and Shiro's mother, Ito, who is feeling too poorly to rise. In another dark room, Shiro meets his father, who runs the place, as well as Ensai, who does not want his daughter Sachiko to marry Shiro, and whose red painting prompts a detective to joke, "Oh, this is where bad folks go when they die." In daytime close-up, Geta, the classic Japanese clogs, walk along train tracks, and then we see these Geta belong to Shiro, whom Sachiko kindly chats up until the sudden red-shirted appearance of Tamura, who chases off Sachiko to tell Shiro how much she resembles Yukiko. Later on the tracks, Kinuko begs Shiro to take her with him to Tokyo if Ito, his mother, dies. She does die as mourners gather, and Ensai blames Gozo for killing his wife by cavorting nearby with his former mistress. Tamura points a sword at each mourner and accuses each of causing deaths by various means. At a river, the two women plotting revenge for Kiyoshi hear an existentially despondent song. The lyrics to that were rough, Karen. At a Tenjoin restaurant, Sachiko and Kinuko compete for Shiro's affection until Shiro receives a note from someone who just has to see him. On a rope bridge over a gorge in broad daylight, Yoko confronts Shiro with the murder of Kiyoshi, draws a pistol on him, but oddly trips and falls to her gruesome death. We see her bonking against the rocks toward the bottom. Tamura instantly appears, as he does, we've established by now. He struggles and also falls, but in his case, into the river. Back at the old age home at night during a bawdy 10th anniversary party, Kinuko flirts with the men, sees Shiro outside, and straddles him until Gozo, his father, interrupts, goes into a rage, semi-accidentally kills Kuniko and tells his son Shiro to keep quiet about it. Outside the party, Shiro sees the Yajimas continuing to mourn Yukiko, and inside, Sachiko interrupts the sake-drenched festivities to report the Yajimas just threw themselves in front of a train, Kieran. Partygoers die from bad fish. Kiyoshi's mom kills most of the rest with poison sake. Tamura shoots dead Sachiko. Shiro strangles Tamura. And Kiyoshi's mom strangles Shiro for killing Kiyoshi and Yoko. Shiro's pronated hand and foot signal him passing into a hellish, abstract landscape where Tamura welcomes him, introduces. Sorry. What did I write? Oh, where Tamura welcomes him. Yes, excuse me. Lost my own train of thought. As bloody-faced Shiro hangs upside down with a sword through his throat, Kieran, red-lit Enma, king of hell, introduces himself, shows Shiro his many crimes through a spiral-tinged montage, and sentences him to the torments of 8 hells. Shiro, on his knees, sees stones everywhere, including some in tall piles, and is told he's at the bank of the river Sanzu, where children linger who die before their parents. This turns out one of these people he meets turns out to be Yukiko, who says their baby also died in the crash, suggests the name Harumi for him, and warns that as we see, their baby is on a lotus leaf floating away down the river. Whoa. Passing the six paths of existence where the damned wander, Shiro, not alone, meets Mrs. and Mr. Yajima, the latter of whom says he's in hell for not helping a soldier with water, prompting an abstract visual of dozens crawling to a small puddle. Enma in voiceover offers thirsty sinners a large pool made up of their pus and piss, Kieran, from where Shiro gets grabbed by Kyochi, who is then seen amongst a long pile of corpses we weirdly cut. And that's where Kyochi blames Shiro for his death. Enma in voiceover describes a rather hellish first circle where we see various tortures, like sinners being cut into pieces and one greedy man being graphically flayed. This is the part of the movie where it's holy moly. I'm glad there are story-based reasons for this, or are there? As Shiro watches Goko and Kinuko fighting, Tamura approaches to tell him no one escapes hell from the lake of blood where the licentious are damned. Some of them crawl out for Shiro's help, but he can't help them, or Yukiko, or Harumi. Those two are suffering above and on a wheel of fire. Tamura encourages Shiro to make love to Sachiko until Ito appears and reveals they're siblings. And she was lying to Goko and Ensai all those years. After Sachiko names Tamura for what he is, Tamura agrees. Oh, yeah, a demon, yeah. And becomes himself the subject of horrible torture, calling out for Shiro. As Shiro runs around mostly buried bodies, some, but the feet are coming up to the ground, others with the heads coming out of the ground. More faces. I want to see more eyes without a face. In a vortex of hand-bound people per Enma, jogging in circles for all eternity, Shiro calls up for Harumi, and per Enma gets one last chance to get his baby off that wheel, jumping onto it until they rotate into a freeze frame. Back in the land of the living, the partygoers lie on the floor as Ensai's painting burns. Two women twirl umbrellas, call out for Shiro, and dissolve into an image of smoke and lotus petals. That's the end, Kieran, although I was told that last shot meant that those two women, obviously Sachiko and
Yukiko.
Yukiko, yeah, obviously they're going to heaven, therefore.
Yes.
I guess that's what that means. To me, it could mean a lot of things. But
Yeah, because I thought they're, let's just say, I thought that they're like being sequestered in any kind of hell for any reason was just a little contrived, let's just say.
okay,
I think they were
well,
just more, they were put there to give
yeah,
Shiro a
yeah.
reason to escape from hell,
Okay,
essentially.
you're right, but at the time I didn't think of it. I was just in a maze of
Of
like
course.
river Styx or what. I didn't even know what I was doing. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, the Sanzu sticks, yeah,
sure.
they both track essentially, right?
Tomato,
So
tomato. Yeah.
you also notice how there's the symbolism about clocks stopping as well, being symbols of
Okay.
bad luck. So
Yeah.
there's like the beginning where when God, I always forget his name, but when
It's all right.
Mora
Oh,
comes bustling into the future family house basically, and he sees that the clock has stopped and points out that's a symbol of bad luck.
yeah.
Then when there's the tableau where everybody dies, slashes, kills each other over at the old folks' home, the clock stops again just before the last third tableau going into hell. And then basically when everything gets resolved, the clock starts back up again, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's some question as to whether Tamura is just a figment of Shiro's imagination. That's
Okay.
something I was thinking about as well, whether he's like the literal devil on his shoulder, that he's actually the one doing all these things himself. It's why the two women who are talking about the men who are supposedly like killed the Yakuza guy, they basically all find him and they never go after Tamura, essentially. They're always talking about
Hey,
him,
that's a good
essentially.
point. So this is like a proto Fight Club where the guy driving the car, even though it looks like Tamura, it's really Shiro imagining
Yeah,
himself in somebody else's body driving, I guess.
yeah. It's like another sort of Faustian, like good sort of evil thing that's going on as
Sure.
well.
But you're
So
right, though. That is suspicious that other characters are not more into like Tamura. Stop it, or that doesn't
there's a
happen.
little bit of that going on. So there's a little bit of confusion. That's, there's some scenes where he's interacting with everyone, although you could say that the interaction could also be Shiro doing that as Tamura, essentially, as being
Right.
the person, his self, who can do everything, who can tell it like it is, can live on the wild side, do all these sort of bad things. It's this other side to him, essentially,
Yeah.
that he's doing, that he's living essentially in these
Yeah.
other scenes where Tamura is interacting with everybody. And then that sort of makes the expelling of him essentially, which is what I believe Yukiko does at this time. They both tell him, Tamura, that he's this demon and be gone essentially. And it's
Yeah.
them like expelling the demon essentially from Shiro as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one way of looking at it, which I thought was interesting. And I think that was a possibility. And I think the actor, if you look at the rest of the supplement with that documentary supplement as well, the actor playing Tabora was trying to figure all this out for himself as well. I think he was
It's
without much guidance as well. And he's an interesting actor too. We'll actually see him later on in another horror film that we'll talk about
nice.
later on as well.
Does,
So
in that final shot, does Yukiko have the baby, Harumi?
yes.
Okay. All right. I get. Okay. So there's three humans going to heaven at that point. All right.
Actually, no, you're right. I don't think he has. I think, oh, that's right. I think the baby is not there. I think it's just implied that the baby,
See, I couldn't tell by looking, but I
yeah.
did take a very good look. Maybe I'll go back. Yeah. But
But
there's a
yeah, there's a nice little like reveal. I think you talked about the reveal that basically that they're all related, right? You mentioned that
yes.
in the plot as well
Yeah.
too. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
that whole, I was wondering, the one thing we didn't see with the tableau before everyone goes to hell, we don't know what happens to the painter necessarily. He's out of
Yeah.
the picture
But
until
then he
the
shows
end
up in hell.
when
He's like, for whatever, but is he really there, or is it just like his
I
voice?
think he's as there as much as Shiro's mother is.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
oddly enough,
Right.
Shiro's mother is in
Right.
there as
These
well
people
too.
just show up.
It's possible that he's in there because you commit suicide, you go to hell, right? There's that possibility also too.
From this
So
movie,
then
I figure like 95% of people go to hell. At this point, I figure I'm going to hell watching
I
it.
think that's the conceit, and that's what Nakagawa is also saying as well, is that he really wanted to make a film. He did the whole heaven thing that the producer was giving him. He
Yeah.
wasn't so much concerned about. He was basically, I want this film about bad people who
Yeah.
go to hell, and they would experience not just hell, but also this particular the Buddhist
Well,
depiction of
and
hell
let me
also.
say, I think this is a better story than Dante's Inferno in many ways, where the lead character is just a tourist and then he can get out of
Right.
it easy. And Faust is better than that, but also
Yes.
I think that this goes places that Faust, the traditional Faust, doesn't really. Hey, forget those Americans who renamed that movie Dr. Faustus. This is going there and then some.
Exactly.
I don't
The
know.
one thing that when we see the painter, when we see him hung also like towards the end, just before the clock starts up again, there's that really beautiful shot of him. And then we basically see like a fire that covers basically the painting that he has, which is a painting of hell and the
Yeah,
fire, the
yeah,
flames
the
are there.
fire. Oh yeah, I mentioned that, or I tried to. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that line where Tamura is just, you're not going to get out of hell, try. And he doesn't. I feel if this was remade in America, he would somehow. I like that
Oh,
it's like
yeah, most
dark.
likely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's dark. This is not.
Similar to what happens with the remake of Diabolique also, for
Thank
instance.
you.
So
Exactly. No, this is the right way to do this material. Don't just don't tack on a happy ending for me. I don't need that.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm trying to think about some other things I was thinking about from here. Nico's funeral.
This movie it's almost, is it a horror film or is it just full of horrors? And I'm fine with that. No, this was like disturbing. Like you keep going to those close-ups of mouths and like those bloody mouths starting to lose teeth made me think of like the feeling of somebody banging my mouth with a stick, like that demon or whatever he's called. He's like an Oni, if that's the
Yeah, yeah.
demon figure.
There's horror images of harm being done to teeth are actually going to be explored in another film that
Well,
we'll be
sure.
covering.
And
Uh,
don't worry, audience. We're not doing American History X. I just wanted to point that out. Not that teeth,
we're
not those.
not doing that. No, this will be an Italian film, so that's fine.
Thank you. So these teeth,
Uh,
these are their teeth. They were Italian. The teeth were bad already.
exactly. Exactly. Let's see. I'm trying to think of
I love the
what
way
else.
Enma is made up. He's my face for this. If I have faces in all three of the other movies and I don't really have one here, I think Enma's my face because he's made up like an old samurai warrior, or not even sam
Exactly.
shogun era.
Yeah, there was like I think there was a little sort of nice flourish, like when the Yakuza guy gets run over, there's like a flash shot of like his glasses against the sort of pool that looks like a little bit of blood, but also
Yeah,
like along the blood, there's this like sort of random white moth that all of a sudden is just there fluttering a little bit,
right.
like on the pool of blood as well. I'm sure there's one of those sort of like happy accidents, I think, that just
And
is
nice.
yeah, it's just really nice as well. So.
This is by far the bloodiest color film we have yet seen on this list. Now, I'm not saying
Yes.
there could have been other ones that we just didn't put on the list, and we can't get everything. But wow, this is quite a step forward.
Oh yeah, agreed. Yeah. And then it's one of yeah, it's definitely there will be it's a sign to come for some other Japanese films as
Oh,
well
sure.
too.
Were the Nakagawa films in the 50s before this like this bloody? I don't know. I didn't really.
I haven't really gotten to see whether to see them to see if they were necessarily. It's I know they've talked about the nature of what ghosts are like in the East as opposed to what they are like in the West. Like in the West, they're much more doing things to you, and that's where the terror is. And the terror, like in the East or in Japanese ghost stories in particular, they're passive, and just the fact that they're there passive in your face in that way also is somehow more terrifying to them in these Japanese ghost stories when it's
Yeah.
different for us where the ghosts are doing things to us and trying to scare us literally. So it's interesting to compare the differences between these two. So
One thing that strikes me about all four of the films we're looking at today is they're all four, at least for me, very full. Like they've got a lot in them. And now I'm not
yes,
saying that like other films are like empty, but I don't know. There's something about a movie like, I don't know, The Mummy, or that is, or I don't know, it's just a little more straightforward and there's not, or I don't know. Not I don't want to throw that particular film under the bus. It's fine. Or maybe Mad Love, like where he's just going crazy or something. I mean that or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're basically like there's three or four or five sets and there's four actors. These films are all maybe Eyes Without a Face is not quite as full as the other three. It still seems like there's a lot going on. There's the mad scientist, there's all the stuff they had to edit out.
yes,
You know, there's been all these people and dogs and everything. And then you move to Peeping Tom, which is such an essay on different parts of London and different, and from the news shop to the movie set to all over to the apartment to the I don't know what. I mean, and just about filmmaking, but also about all these about your father and repression. And then this, and obviously our next film are just ridiculously full. There's all kind.
right,
They're playing on tropes they've each got 10. We get next film up, we got like a vampire, then we got a witch, then we got like this, that, and the other. We got
right.
this movie's got okay, here's this circle of hell, here's this other thing. But I think with all that fullness, there's a definite unity in each film, and that's what's really
Mhm.
striking, is like there's a unity of what's going on, and you don't feel you're not like sitting there going, okay, it's not like when you're handed the menu, Kieran, at like Cheesecake Factory, and you're like, okay, wait, there's 220 items. Why did they bother? I'm not going to this. It's not that feeling. It's that feeling
Right.
this is full but good.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. No. No, I'm yeah, like we said at the beginning, this is going to be difficult to just pare things down as far as what our
Yes, that
impressions
you
were
were
for these
so right.
films.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
you made the reason of why so perfectly.
We're
So
skipping over little things and not necessarily getting back to everything, but that's okay. It's all right to do that. Yeah.
yeah.
Was there any pressing, dare I say, burning issues with Jigoku that we having? Apparently,
Because of also because of I do think if we want to talk more about the director and how he handled things on the set, he was like a lot more collaborative. Let's just say he
yeah,
was a very big fan with his crew and everything else. He was like
like
a
that.
big He sounded very sort of Altman-esque actually, where he sort of was
Yeah,
big
that's
about
nice. That,
having like end of the day sort of drinking and eating, talking with about the film and other things with everybody, including the cast and the crew. He's a very big proponent of that, it seems like, as well.
that's
And I think
great.
everyone appreciated that. So much so that because of their budget, apparently, with those holes that the actors were the pits that they were all in, a lot of the actors like chipped in and pitched in on helping dig their own holes, apparently, for the film as well. So,
Now that's when you know you've got an actor like everybody's happy with each other. Yeah, that's great.
exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was just reading about how people are like, one great thing about David Lynch is that he seemed to be friends. Most of his actors were paying tribute to him as a friend, not just as a good,
Mm,
and
yeah, that's
that's
right.
really something. Yeah, it's especially to be a friend, but also have a vision, which clearly Nakagawa does. Okay, yeah, I'm good here.
Okay.
This was quite a stunner. Any last? I think you, much like Mark's father, you got in a good last word there. I don't know. Yeah, no, each of these had good endings. His ripped up face as she walks away with the doves. This is what it sounds like when doves cry. No, I'm kidding. That was a thing that people mentioned about Face Off because John Woo wouldn't say whether Eyes Without a Face was like one of his influences for Face Off. They're like, but
The dubs definitely were. Yeah.
yeah, and there's doves. There's
Yes.
egregious dubs. Okay, yeah, but let's give ourselves a few minutes for our next. But anyway, I love. Wow, that's weird. It's strange that we hadn't. I guess it makes sense if we hadn't been to Japan if they hadn't even used the word horror yet. But there were a bunch of '50s films we could have mentioned, and I would have mentioned Godzilla if it wasn't on the other list because that's
Yes.
one of the iconic monsters.
I didn't even realize that for some reason, I thought Onibaba was like before this film, and actually, I think it was after, which was
Mhm.
surprising to me. For some reason, I thought it was the other way around. So that also makes it more prescient as well.
Boy, just so many great movies to go see. And I don't know, I was seeing an interview. This was House of Haunted Hill, which we already talked about, 1959. Steven Tyler was like, you went with your girlfriend, you screamed, she screamed, you screamed, we all had a good time. That was a time of that when they
Hmm.
were teenagers or whatever. And I think that's what we're also seeing here is that they're reacting to that, but also making it better. This or some of them are better. I don't know. Okay, so now finally, what are we calling this film, Karen? Give me a name for it. Black Sunday? Should that be our name?
I call it Black Sunday. We basically see it, like at least you and I have been seeing it when we've been reviewing it, at least this week, as the Mask of Satan, but I always know it as Black Sunday. So,
Sunday's fine, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, this is an interesting little film. It's another AIP. AIP acquired it.
Yeah.
It was already, sorry. So this is fascinating to me the way that do you want to speak to how these Italians came along with this or how Mario Bava, was his big breakthrough film, what happened?
So it's an interesting story, and I don't know as much as I should, but he basically came from a family and also sired a family of filmmakers also. His son, Lamberto Bava, is also still currently a filmmaker, although the Italian film industry has been dead for quite a while in general, in particular
Yeah.
genre and genre film in particular. So he's mostly makes his bones with television. Television has been very big in Italy for quite a while because of Berlusconi and some other different reasons as well. But his son was a big genre film producer or director in the 80s as well. And his Mario Bava came from a line of filmmakers as well. His dad was a filmmaker, and Mario started out himself mostly as a cinematographer and also excelled, and you can see here, as someone who created visual effects for films too, which made him in demand. Having both of those in his toolkit essentially. And what started to happen, it seems, is that he got into the habit, and it wasn't intentional, of just being the cameraman or cinematographer on films. And certain directors would start out with these films, and then after a few days, for different reasons, they'd say, "Oh, I don't want to finish this film." And then they'd leave the production, and Mario Bava would just end up stepping in and finishing the film. And this sort of started to happen like a few times too many. And it was also because of him being a cameraman by trade and also being a very shy kind of a facing person. They didn't necessarily want to be necessarily a director. It wasn't necessarily his nature as well, but he knew that was something that was his sort of next step career-wise anyway. And he was always interested in horror and fantasy anyway because of his background providing special effects for other films previously. So that's like how this film came about and how he got attached to it.
When you say you don't know as much as you wish you did, that's you still know 20 times more than like most people I would have asked this question to. So well done.
It's also interesting. I knew about this a little bit more, and I think I sent you very last minute like a link to a particular book that I thought I couldn't find or get access to, which was like an authoritative book about Mario Bava as well. There's
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, so I was looking at that in particular. Like if this book ever gets like right now it's out of print, and if you want to buy it on Amazon for $2,000, you can. Yeah, so it's tempting, right? It's just, but it's one of those, what I could tell is like a giant coffee table book about his films. And his body of work definitely warrants a coffee table book if you
Yeah.
look at it as well.
Oh yeah.
So,
Well, it's good you managed to get squeeze this into the horror 100 just at the last minute there, because if we hadn't, that's important, I think.
yeah.
It's an excellent film. It works. So clearly we would have been missing out if that,
Mhm.
yeah. There's a bunch of, yeah, I don't know. I guess you're going to talk about Barbara Steele eventually. Maybe we wait till
Yeah, she just I think
Scream Queen.
his experience, I'm trying to remember which film he was on before, where somehow, for some reason, and this actually applies to American films too, where Italian audiences, there was a particular film, some sort of horror film that he was doing cinematography on as well, that got classed up essentially by having a British actor or actress in it as well. And
Right.
that's what we feel as Americans too, how like things get classed up a bit when there are British actors and
And
particular
maybe
key roles as well.
the
And so
funding might
that's
have gotten a little easier, at least for its pitch, because of, but they may not have needed that. I guess they just come off of Hercules and Hercules Unchained, which did well, and
right.
he'd been the DP, like you said, and yeah, I can see they were willing to give some money. Yeah.
Yeah, but she was also relatively new. Like she was, I think, 18 or 19 when she made this film too.
Oh,
So
wow. So this was her discovery. Yeah.
yeah, it was her discovery also.
Yeah, I think that's the film. We can't find the budget, I found out, or at least it's hard to find. Yeah, it's based on this story VIY.
Yeah, it's that's so Gogol,
From
which who is should we should basically say he's a Ukrainian author. That's how I just describe him these days. But that story, which is it's really there's very little of this story that really translates to this film. There's actually a Russian film that happens later in '67. That's actually a pretty good film and pretty faithful to that story. I would recommend people who
Nice.
wants to actually see the actual story provided faithfully in a film, they can go seek that one out.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, this might be the film in this list so far that's based on the oldest story. This
Yeah.
story is from 1835. It's set then too, and they pretty much preserve that too, which is fun.
Hmm.
That's cool. If during the pitching process, if anybody had to be like, I don't know if this is the kind of this material seems a little new and untested. It's not new and untested, sorry. Uh,
Right.
yeah, but all right, should we jump into the final plot then? I don't know. Yeah,
Yes,
I feel like we've
definitely do
got
that.
yeah. Black Sunday, sometimes called the Mask of Satan, begins in a dark, leafless wood. Much eyes without a face. That's how I like him to begin. The voiceover says it's the 17th century when Satan was fighting vampires. That is a fight you want to see. A witch, Asa, is tied to a burning stake and branded with an S by the High Court Inquisition of Moldavia. How do they say Moldavia in the film, or do they say Moldavia? They don't say Moldavia. I think they say Moldavia.
They just say Moldavia.
Yeah. This Inquisition is led by Griabi Vaida, who condemns his own sister to death for her love of Javatic, but counter condemns her brother with promises of curses just before a man hammers a gothic spiky mask onto her face, as Kieran mentioned. After credits, voiceover notes that as if summoned by a demon, sudden rain prevented burning Asa, but the men disposed of her and Javatic anyway. 2 centuries later, Dr. Choma Kruvayan, am I going to say that right? Kruvayan?
Let me look at that again, if I can see
Kruvagin?
that.
And his assistant,
Uh,
Dr. Andre Gorobek, ride in a
I think
carriage.
it's Kruvajan.
Kruvajan. Kruvajan?
Yeah, I think it's Kubrion and then Gorabek, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Rubian and Gorobek ride in a carriage whose driver and horses seem reluctant to pass through a creepy landscape when a wheel breaks. The doctors explore this since they're sitting there anyway. The doctors explore an ancient castle and its crypt, finding a tomb that Crouvion says has a window so that the figure inside will see the cross of the grave and stay put. However, when a large bat relentlessly attacks Crouvion, he beats at it and shoots it dead, but in the struggle, he breaks the cross and glass, causing his hand to bleed on the corpse and him to move the mask to see a surprisingly intact and even watchful face that I will call Asa's death face, Kieran. That's my name for that.
Mhm.
That Michael Myers-like visage.
Yeah.
Although the driver calls that the wheel is fixed, the two doctors stop to chat with Katya, a dead ringer for Asa, asking about the gunshot and claiming everything is going to ruin. Bugs slither in the eyes of Asa's death face as Katya plays piano. Her brother Constantine cleans a rifle, and their father, Prince Vayuda, fears legacies and omens, in what he says. In the tomb, Asa's death face's eyes light up. In the common eating room of their village inn, drunk Andre bids goodnight to Crouvaillon, who agrees with a local mother that her daughter should go milk the cow despite the night in nearby cemetery. As this teen girl nervously does this, Us's death face appears in a pool, saying, "Rise, Javadich," and thunder rumbles as a griffin emblem-wearing figure emerges from a grave and pulls off his mask. In the castle, Vida awakens to odd fireplace activity and an approaching slimy-faced Javatich, but grabbing and wielding his bed cross frightens Javatich off. His kids run in at the sound and find him alone, so Katya suggests they send Boris, a servant, to find one of the doctors she knows are in Mirogorod, that village. However, Javatich is the one driving a creepy carriage, finding Crouvaillon, convincing him to come help Vida, and whipping the horses, Kieran, like he's Ichabod Crane. At the castle, Crouvaillon, abandoned in the halls, descends into the crypt where he finds Asa's death mask looks alive. Just before the tomb falls apart and the undead Asa commands Crouvion to become undead by kissing her, which he does. Soon, an oddly sedate Crouvion arrives. I put that in quotation marks. Tends to Vida, moves the cross so as not to upset Vida, tells, that's what he says the reason is, tells Katya that he'll now sleep soundly and says, no, he doesn't have to return to the village that night. Later, Constantine finds his sister moaning in pain and his father a bloody mess, talking about a griffin and a man in a portrait. In the morning, Andre wonders at his friend's absence, borrows a horse, and rides to the castle, passing the milkmaid, who finds Boris's body in the river. When villagers come to the castle to ask for justice for Boris, Andre grills them, including a girl who points to a painting of the man that she saw driving Crouvaillon. Andre leaves, meets Boris, determines that Boris was killed with the same bite that killed Vida, and returns to Vida Castle. In her room, Katya removes her cross necklace and sees a gloved hand come through her curtain, causing her screams that bring Andre and Constantine. Andre finally finds Crouvaillon, who is acting odd, and runs from his friend. The next day, Andre and Constantine put pieces together, find a secret door in a walk-in fireplace, order Yvonne to remain, just in case, go through a passage, open another passage behind an erotic painting of Asa, and enter the crypt where they see Asa is lying there breathing. A rope comes from off screen and murders Yvonne. Do we know whose that was? Do you know who that was that murdered Yvonne right then near the
I
walk?
assume it's what's his name? Yeah.
Constantine can't get back through the fireplace, and he looks at the erotic painting until Jovitich magically appears and scares him into falling into a pit. Andre and a priest go to the cemetery to check Jovitich's grave, but are shocked to find instead dead Crouvaillon. Katya freaks out, puts her head on her father's grave, is surprised to see him awaken and faints, but undead Vaida fights with Javatich, who throws him into the walk-in fireplace where he burns. Andre and Javatich have a little hand-on-hand combat. I like that. I need it. I can use some hand-to-hand in my movies, Kieran. Near that one pit where Andre eventually tosses in Javatich and pulls out a wounded Constantine, who tells Andre to hurry to help his sister. In the crypt next to Katya, Asa manages to steal some of Katya's life force, but can't quite kill her because of the cross she wears. When Andre shows up, Asa persuades him that she's Katya, meaning Asa is Katya, and he must kill that witch. See there, she's taking advantage, Kieran, of the whole doppelganger thing. But just before Andre's about to do it, the cross stops him and he peels back Asa's cloak to show her flayed undead body. Yay, we needed another flayed body, which he soon explains to the surprise and surprisingly welcome torch-bearing mob. The narrator says this mob is picking up where another one left off 2 centuries before by actually burning Asa at the stake while inside the crypt. Andre sees Katya move and makes his move, Kieran, kissing her with flames of passion. The end. This is
Hmm.
rather a delightful film.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah, it just all the pieces work and fit together, and I mean, I could see how they could have probably made this differently or better, made it fit together just a little better, but I don't care. I mean, it gets by on style so well.
It's incredibly stylish, and I think um, you could say that might be a little to its detriment when I could spend essentially the whole film
Eternity,
exploring the castle,
2 centuries.
essentially.
You could spend two
Yeah.
centuries.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it loses a little bit of its suspense basically when you leave the grounds, even though you leave the
Yeah.
grounds for a
Good.
particular reason. You need the mob essentially. You need the religious figure to put all the pieces together
Yeah.
because
Although,
in
boy, did that
some
pre
ways, actually, both doctors are actually not that helpful necessarily.
they're really not, are they?
So
Yeah.
one is overtly rational. This is like another sort of case where somebody who's like overtly rational basically starts a chain of events that lead directly to his own demise and turns a rational world upside down and makes it unrational, and it causes his own doom essentially. So it's interesting to see that sort of play out again. Again, you'll probably see this in other films as well. The the sort of a resurrection that slowly happens for Asa is also very effective as well throughout. Even though when there's what I call like the oatmeal and eggs period that happens with her eyes, if you notice that as well, there's like a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit of
yeah.
that.
Bugs,
So
whatever it is. Yeah, sure.
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of actually everything leading up to her meeting the doctor, that whole scene, the scene involving them just like the girl going to milk the cow outside, walking through the woods, the doctor walking through the woods, the resurrection of Javatich as well. All that is excellently done. When Javatich walks away from his resurrection, that's also pretty striking as well. All of a sudden, like the full moon just shows up out randomly at the last second.
Cool movie, man.
The yeah,
You got
the
that.
resurrection movie, the resurrection of Asa would be used in other sort of vampire films. Christopher Lee, at least one of his sequels gets resurrected in a similar way with someone else's blood.
I guess
There,
His Dracula was an influence on this, or a slight influence anyway. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And other sort of zombies resurrect. Kovacic resurrection is definitely like how other zombies get resurrected from the grave as well, too.
But had we seen that before?
We
Because
hadn't. That's why it's
yeah,
also,
it's
yeah,
influential over that. It's really well done, that coming out of the grave. It's almost horribly irreverent, which is what I like about it.
right. Little funny things about just like the credits for the film, that apparently the film is a Jolly film production. I don't know if you caught that as well, which I thought was funny. There's also what is actually important, and you'll know that if you've seen any sort of spaghetti westerns or any sort of films from Europe through the 60s and the 70s that have a mixture of native and English speaking actors, is that there's like a little seal in the movie about the English Language Dubbers Association.
I
That's
missed
also in the
that.
credit as
Wow.
well. Yeah, and that's like a very important association for Italian films in particular of this period and
Mhm.
going through there as well. Yeah, it's also, I don't know, I was trying to figure out how large Moldavia was as far as like a nation at that point. I was trying to figure out the history of that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
There's talk about the coach driver fighting Napoleon at that time as well.
Yeah, but
So
he could have been in the war it was like 20 years before. God knows what he, but yes, sure. Because, and also Napoleon did get all the way to Egypt, etc. So,
Right, right. Yeah, it was interesting to
but
figure all that
no,
out as
I thought that
well.
was good. Yeah. And I love that we're in Moldavia. I'm like, we never get to go to
Hmm.
Moldavia in any movie. I'm not saying they filmed it there, but I'm just like, that is one more reason I'm loving this batch of 4 films that we're just in places when we don't normally get to be.
Yes, exactly. And the Satan mask that they both wear, it's probably like the most striking piece, I would say, in the
He
film as
is
well.
something.
It's that one is also made, that was made by Mario Bava's father also.
Wow, I didn't know that. That is very cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the
I mean,
first, it reminded me also of there's what do you call it, the Iron Maiden as well. It's like
yeah.
just the mask version of the Iron Maiden, and an Iron Maiden actually shows up later, I think in one of Barbie's films. I think Baron Blood. He had a random film called Baron Blood, like with late stage Joseph Cotton in it actually. But there's an Iron Maiden in that one. It made me think of that particular mask, especially the shots of the mask going towards Asa as well, where it's like there's the shadows of all the spikes and everything is swirling around and the spikes, and it's like a going clockwise and counterclockwise. It's very striking when that happens as well.
Yeah, no, I
So
was thinking Usmani Sembeni had to be influenced by this for the mask and Black Girls.
yes,
I'm probably not, but I still like this was like, wow. No, I agree. This movie is just so this has got it all. It's got like witches, vampires, ghosts, skeletons, like burning at the stake. What you just said, the Iron Maiden. We have it all. And but again, there's unity. That's the thing, is like it works.
right.
It's quite something, this movie. I don't know. There's a lot going on here in a good way.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah, and we can talk about Mario Bava being very much pioneering and influential to other sort of particular Italian horror film directors that we'll be
Oh
covering
yeah,
go
well
on as
definitely.
well.
Well, that's why it's good.
And
That's why it's good we snuck him in here. Yeah.
yeah, we stuck him in here because he influenced definitely he definitely filmed one of the first giallos, which we'll be talking about at length as well.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films of him is what happened later on in the early 70s, which is a his sort of response, I think, to all the popular giallos that sort of happened essentially. And his, I don't know, a little bit tongue in cheek. It's definitely like a proto slasher. There's at least one Friday the 13th movie that directly copies a lot of things from that movie in particular. It's called Bay of Blood, but it also, like many Italian horror films, has many different titles. One of them, which is the best title ever, called Twitch of the Death Nerve. It's probably
Wow,
like one of
nice name.
yeah, it's a great name. So yeah, he made quite a few films. His life was cut a little bit short, unfortunately. He passed away by, I think he was gone by the time his last film came out, I think in 1980. So he actually didn't live as long as he should have actually to so it's interesting to see some other his other people who followed in his footsteps. I think are a little more well known, especially when they first came out. It took a little while for Mario Bava's oeuvre to be presented to everybody, and everyone could see how influential he was. So,
I'm just reading here, Kieran, that if you want to go to this castle, you could. It's
oh
Castle
yeah,
Massimo in Arsoli is the name of the town. Yeah,
oh
and
nice.
I don't know, just saying you might want to head over there. Of course, it's in Rome, or it's near Rome. It's not in Moldova, sorry. Yeah.
And thinking of the weather right now, and also what was going on
Sure.
with that castle right now, it made me think how just ridiculously difficult it would be to keep yourself warm in a castle. So,
Um,
especially one that just had so much that was decaying like this one was. It was decaying like how the family reputation had decayed throughout the generations. And it
ooh,
was interesting to see that was going on, and yet they still held on to having those giant portraits of the two sort of
sure.
worst family
Yeah,
members,
because
essentially,
what could ever
in their
go
castle
wrong?
there.
What could go wrong with keeping those, haunting everybody? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So,
Yeah, this is just a fascinating. I mean, I can see why. Now, I guess of all 4 of these films, this at least did this do badly also, or did this do at least
it
okay?
did okay, but it wasn't.
Wasn't
It led him to do other films, but the general sort of theme of his career was his films were mostly appreciated outside of Italy more than
so
they were.
he more had to like scrape for funds.
Yeah, he definitely had to scrape for funds throughout his career. So but he was already ingenious that way because of his background creating special effects, being a cinematographer
Just it,
himself.
it doesn't look like a cheap film, and I guess it's a little more expensive than some films, but still, they get a lot out of what they have, is what I would say.
Agreed. Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
crypt is really well realized. It doesn't seem
Yes.
cheap or chintzy the way they sometimes do. Um,
Yeah, and the shape of it is interesting too, because you didn't see so much of a particular crypt built the way it is, and the way they explain why they had to build the crypt with a mirror and everything as well. It's an interesting design.
yeah. What else? Go ahead. We got
That's
like
about it. Just it's a good sort of introduction to a
two.
still somewhat underappreciated Italian director. And if you think about Italian films, and you think about Fellini and the rest, then you might as well just think about some other
Tony,
directors from Italy as well. Yeah,
right? But why not talk about Bava right here? Yeah.
exactly.
And he's right there, and he should be. If you look at what he's doing, it's very impressive what he's, if you think about how difficult it is to get these shots, because he doesn't linger on these shots very long, and they're really
Right.
impressive shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Steele was just cast. I guess they got her because there was like an actor strike in the States or something, and she was British.
Mm,
That anyway. I'm just reading some of this stuff. Yeah,
right.
but what I'm now realizing as it's come time to start to wrap this up a little bit is I think what, and I hadn't even realized this until listening to you a minute ago, but what I think I love about these four films is that none of them are really asking me to root for a goody character. I don't know who. I mean, you know how we've had lots of goody, like
Mm.
virtuous men. I don't even need to name the films. Like we've had, that's usually the nice guy that we is supposed to
Right. There's a little bit of that in Black Sunday, a little bit, but
could
ultimately it's Asa's
argue.
story or
That's the
the,
thing. It's funny. That's what you made me realize when I'm watching this movie. I'm rooting for Asa. I should even be rooting for Katya, but somehow, well, but they set it off with her being unjustly punished, her being burned at the stake. So I want her to. It'd be different if they hadn't had that opening scene. But because of that opening scene, we are positioned to want Asa to have some revenge, at
It's
least.
interesting. She is technically, in theory, she is I don't think she's unjustly a witch necessarily or practicing
That's what
Satan
I
or anything
mean.
like that.
They've got the subtlety of what a witch, and we haven't been, it's not like we've been watching a lot of witch movies where the witches got to be somebody we would cheer for at any point.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then in the other movies too, I'm not saying that I'm really rooting for Mark and Peeping Tom. It's not that, but I'm not really, but he's my character. You see where I'm, and then the
I'm
same.
also I would say rooting for Mark and Helen to actually get things together a little bit, actually.
Maybe you root for Helen, but I find that I'm not, even though I know that Mark is a terrible person, I can still watch him go through this in a way that we weren't, I don't know. Like, this is what I mean about things changing from the 50s to the 60s, is like that. The doctor in the Eyes Without a Face is, I know he's not really our lead, but he's the person you're relating to ish. This is what I mean.
Ish. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like all these bad guys are getting much. They're almost like Alan Rickman in Die Hard level. Like you're gonna root for them even though you know they're terrible. I mean,
What they have is that they actually have like scenes of showing them like not just doing monstrous deeds, but
yeah,
doing it's similar to the Doctor in Eyes Without a Face is similar to the Doctor in Mad Love. And there are scenes where he's showing kindness with other
yeah,
patients. He believes,
yeah.
in
I
theory, in the
didn't talk
Hippocratic
about
Oath,
that.
essentially,
Yeah.
even if he's taking it to a
There
particular
was
level
literally
that
a scene in Eyes Without a Face that reminded me of Madeline when he was with the kid, and will be everything. How many fingers am I holding up? Oh, four, oh, three. That was really sweet,
yeah.
and there is that, and that's a really. It's. I'm glad you bring that up, or I'm glad. I don't know. Yeah, and I guess in the same with Shiro, he's bad, but he's not bad. Again, so it's but I guess what I'm getting at is that like now it's a lot less black and white. And I mean
Yes.
happening with not literally, but clearly the Norman Bates character that is also, if he is our rooting interest, is clearly not the traditional hero. He's not exactly John Wayne. I guess
Right.
thing is none of the lead men in this movie are really John, and not even Kruvia, because you think it's going to be Kruvia. Now Andre is a little bit more of the traditional hero. I get that he's like the Monty Clift character that would be coming in
Right.
being cool or whatever, but Yeah, but I don't even root for him. I know that he has to do these things, but I also am like, I'm like
Exactly.
not even interested in him. Asa's sort of more interesting to me. So
Yeah.
I guess I love that pivot because what that does is, especially in this genre of horror, makes everything just so less predictable because we don't know which way it's going to go. And I think that the unpredictability of each of these four films, on some level, I think was just very exciting for me.
Yeah. And I think it just mirrors the unpredictability of what goes on in life in general. And I think if you can mirror or show what that is in whatever genre you're covering in a film, that just makes the film more interesting. At least to me, it does. So,
And you're absolutely right. Yes. All right. That was my fine. I didn't even have that summary when we started this. You prompted it from what you said. Anything else, though, that we should mention here before?
nothing else. I mean, I was looking at the Bava book and realizing that they actually were showing like photos of the set in color, and I've
Wow.
could have seen, and it looked
What is
like
it? What does
actually
it look like?
it looks great also.
Yeah,
So it
I
just
bet.
looks like it would have worked just well in color as well, which is nice.
I read that the producer was like, not only can we not afford it, but also it's not appropriate to the material. But I guess Bava would get to play with color a little later. But
Oh yeah, he definitely did later anyway. So all worked out as just
I'm sure
as it
in
was meant to be.
retrospect, he probably enjoyed having this like black and white creepy film in his oeuvre. It's cool.
Yeah, agreed.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have made Nosferatu the way they did.
Right.
These are special films. I was very excited to record this episode. I don't know if like
Yeah,
that,
same here.
but this was a real pleasure throughout. Next week's gonna suck. No, I'm kidding. Actually, next week's fine. It's good. We're covering a little more territory. We're going into the mid, we're going from the beginning to the mid of the 60s. I don't know. Okay, why
Sort
am
of.
I even saying that? The movies are going to be The Innocents, Carnival of Souls, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and The Birds. I'm so glad we're gonna check out those two films, which neither of which needed to necessarily be on this list, but I like that they are for
I
various
like them.
we'll get
Yeah.
into. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kieran. Another amazing job you did.
Oh yeah, thank you as well. This was a particularly fun episode, as we've said throughout the episode, how fun this episode was,
Hope
and
our
it was. Yeah.
we hope that we hope that our enthusiasm is contagious to you.
Yes.
Trying to get to you. Okay. Anyway, so Kieran, do you want to say the last line of the podcast or do you want me to do it? You could.
Let's see. I believe this is a part where we would just say, save us some popcorn because there's always a movie to see.